Thank you everyone for spending the time to go over this presentation with me and Justin. This is our presentation over beliefs. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the question that we're investigating is just the influence of beliefs, whether they are group or individual beliefs, on cultural, spiritual values that relate to the individual or that group, to the world, creating their perceptual lens, both being permanent, fixed, or variable beliefs. Go ahead and go to the next slide, and how these beliefs can affect the way that we attach or cope with pain. So the objectives of this PowerPoint presentation are to define the differences between religion and spirituality, which Justin will go over here on the next slide, to review some of the literature of the different religions, ethnicities, and subgroups, and their beliefs on pain and how they can be addressed in healthcare and the way that we deliver care to our patients. To understand the cultural competence in the athletic training profession and how we can apply cultural competence to our patients to enhance the care and the way that we deliver care to our diverse population. Also to understand the cultural values that influence these belief systems. And lastly, to understand how religion and spirituality influence beliefs and coping mechanisms. Go ahead and go over to the next slide. And I will let Justin jump in and explain the differences between religion and spirituality. Go ahead.
All right, so for religion and spirituality, just to decipher between the two of them and to shed a light on the two differences, they're actually completely two different meanings. So, religion is extrinsic, organized faith system grounded in institutional standards, practices, and core beliefs. So, as you obviously know, your traditional Sunday services at any type of Christian church, the Catholic Church, your Catholic Mass, your different types of religious services at Mormon temples, at mosques, at Jewish temples, all of that. Uh, that's that's religion right there, and that is an organized faith system where a group of people can come together, or you can do it on your own, and you are practicing within that faith system of the standards of it. Now, spirituality is something completely different. It's actually a lot more broad. So, spirituality, as defined by Glover Graff et al., which we'll be referencing quite a bit in this presentation, are intrinsic personal beliefs and practices that can be experienced within or without formal religion. So, if you guys remember speaking, or if you guys remember reviewing the bucketing and vibrations videos, all of them, Dr. Nasipany and Dr. May speak a lot to spirituality as you don't have to just believe in God or anything like that. It may be whatever higher power that motivates you and that you believe in anything that's a higher being that can help you with your values and how you live your life. So two completely different meanings there, and we're going to go a little bit into religion and how different religions deal with pain based on some of the studies that we reviewed. So, for religion and spiritual beliefs and pain, so what a lot of people don't know is that the spiritual foundations of healthcare date back to the Middle Ages, where physicians were clergy members and the churches licensed these clergy members. So, unlike now, where we as athletic trainers or the physicians that we work under, work with, unless you're in the state of California, we are licensed or registered within our state. So I'm licensed in the state of Idaho. Um, I know that obviously If you're in Texas, any other state or anything like that, you have to be under the watchful guidance of the state government. However, back in the day, the churches who was your quote unquote state government or your licensing body. Wachholtz et al. From a study in 2007 concluded that religion and spirituality coping correlates with the feelings of spiritual support, spiritual connection, peace, calmness, decreased anxiety, and improved mood. So, your ability to practice your religion to help you deal with pain and any type of condition was helpful with decreasing anxiety and helping improve your mood. So, with a more positive mood, that has been correlated with decreased sensitivity to pain and increased ability to withstand the impact of negative situations. So, a more obviously, as we know, more positive mindset, more positive emotions can help with our pain. And I know that quite a few of you have spoken a little bit to that on previous presentations. I know that Jay did when talking about the limbic system. I know that Cameron did as well on his presentation. So, still going along with religion and spiritual beliefs and pain. Spiritual support stems from a positive approach to God, and that God is, and a feeling that God is a benevolent higher power who loves and supports them. So, if individuals feel loved and supported by that higher power or by God or whoever their spiritual connection is to, they may be less likely to give up on a task and continue active coping with pain, which can help improve pain tolerance. So you're feel like you're being supported by your higher power, then you feel like you have, I guess, a little bit more of a meaning to, you have something that's worth still fighting for and worth living for. Now, Glover Graff et al., which was cited in one of the first slides, they surveyed 95 chronic pain patients. As most people are probably not surprised by, the most frequent responses to dealing with chronic pain were taking medication. That was number one at 80%, and number two was praying. That was 61%. Again, they perceive God or that spiritual power as helping them cope with pain as a source of happiness, connection, and a purpose in life. The problem, or the not problem, but barrier to a lot of what the patients that were surveyed said was that rehab professionals shy away today from that. They either do not feel qualified or comfortable, or that stigma that religion should not, it's that separation of church and state. It's that religion should not be coexisting with healthcare, and also just because of the fact that a lot of rehab professionals, including physicians, physical therapists, athletic trainers, any type of healthcare professional, may just not feel qualified or feel like it's within their scope of practice. However, a lot of these patients who were surveyed did say that they wish that they did have more spiritual support from their said physician or healthcare professional. Now, another study by George et al. From 2015 found that even in the face of illness, prayer remains multifaceted. So the five facets or categories of prayer that patients were, so they did a study that showed all the different patients that prayed for uh, anything within their condition. And it actually had a table of all the different prayers of a lot of the different prayers that were involved within the subjects. So they compiled all of these prayers and categorize them into five different categories. So we've got disease centered prayer, which is the prayer for disease, that it goes away. Assurance centered is that God does and will continue to take care of them. Then there was God centered prayer, which is the relationship of God and the patient. Others centered, which was very interesting. Patients must pray for others, including family and friends and their physicians. This often gets overlooked um, because a lot of some of these patients that were placed in this category, if they prayed for themselves, they considered themselves being selfish, whereas they wanted to think of how they're being empathetic towards their family and friends. How does my condition affect my family since I'm a loved one? How does it affect my friends, my relatives? And then also they also were empathetic towards their physicians who they know that the physicians have a lot of pressures on them, and they wanted to pray for them to help get them through it because they know they have a lot of pressure on them. And then there's lamentation, fear, and complaint and doubt, which was the least common. Which praying can be regarded as a strategy to cope and connect with a higher source, provide meaning and hope. And George et al. Also concluded that healthcare professionals may cooperate with a clinical chaplain to provide spiritual reading or quiet environment. Now, one way that we can apply this, and we'll get into, where do we go from here, is obviously the point that they're trying to make here is in a hospital setting, most hospitals now have a clinical chaplain on site or someone that they refer out to for spiritual matters. This can also be applicable to athletic trainers who obviously work in a clinic or hospital who work closely with a chaplain, a pastor, a priest, or even if you're working within athletics for a high school or a university. How can this be applicable to us? Well, um, getting in touch with some type of you know chaplain or pastor or anything like that can also help our patients out with dealing with any types of mental, physical, or any types of pain that they are dealing with if they want to explore the spiritual matters of it. Now, religious aspects and personal beliefs on anxiety, Agrostos et al. 2014 suggests that emotional support in a religious or spiritual group has been proven to be effective, that it's a major therapeutic tool, and that clinicians should thus strive to obtain those skills and the understandings of just different religious or spiritual aspects, and that they also concluded that an attitude of religious openness could result in individualized therapeutic objectives and methods that are adjusted for personal beliefs. Now, Miller et al. Found that, and we're going to transition over to culture. So, for religion and spiritual beliefs and pain for culture, Miller et al. For a study in 2021 found that multiple demographics and clinical factors were also associated with spirituality, including age, race, and religious preference. Miguel, I'm going to go ahead and transition this over to you, and I'll let you speak a little bit more to this.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. So yeah, Miller et al. Did find that there were some demographics and clinical factors that Justin just mentioned. So one of the things that was found was that later on in life, it does appear that patients become a little bit more, it becomes spiritual practice or spiritual aspects of life start become a little bit more prevalent in later ages of life. Another thing to note too was that in our research findings, we found that African Americans actually tend to have high value of spirituality when it comes to advanced forms of illnesses. So this could include cancer. Also noted that African Americans tend to be a lot more aggressive when it comes down to end of life practices. We were actually able to identify that the difference between spirituality and religious effects when it comes down to care practices is that people that associate themselves to be more spiritual tend to be more or less aggressive and life-preserving techniques. So when it comes down to more of a religious standpoint, people have been seen to actually more opt towards fighting for that person to, fighting for that patient, that family member, so to speak, to, be put on life support or, have to rely more on mechanical intervention. So treatment preferences definitely have been seen to have to be affected with spiritual versus religious identifications, and end of life practices have also been influenced by those kinds of associations as well. One of the things to note is that one of the reasons why some people may not so much see an issue or their influences as far as treatment preferences may be influences because some religious or spiritual influences may believe that only God has the ability to decide who lives and who dies. So deciding that life between that life or death scenario, and that there may be some religious prohibitions against the idea of physician-assisted death or any advanced directives that limit life-sustaining treatments. Really what this really does highlight is just the calling for divine intervention, or where people want to see miracles occur. So if somebody were just to opt to, like a non-resuscitatory order, where it's like, okay, do we want medical science to do the best it can, or do we just allow God's will to take place? So these spiritual beliefs are just important to understand when it comes to how we cope with illness, and how it provides that framework for us to make these treatment decisions as well. And then also from this Miller et al. Reference, what we've also seen is that there is a high percentage of women with breast cancer that we've found that Asian and Pacific Islanders consider themselves to be more spiritual and engage more in spiritual practices compared to Caucasian breast cancer survivors. So I'll get a little bit more into this onto the next slide. Justin, go ahead and flip this over. So when it comes down to cultural beliefs and cultural belief systems, I mean, realistically, any belief system can transition over to becoming a limiting system. It just kind of depends, because realistically, any belief system that works for us in a certain light or in a certain perspective actually starts to become the thing that's limiting us. So it just kind of goes to one of those things that, if you believe in something and it's your end all be all, well, how long is that going to work before that now starts becoming that thing that's limiting you or hindering you? So at some point, your belief system just stops serving you, so to speak. And you could see this in how it affects public health. So in this Shaw et al. Study, we found that in certain Asian cultures that pre-cancer screenings, like for breast cancer, aren't so much culturally appropriated. It's actually kind of frowned upon, because what some cultures may believe is that cancer is like a test of faith, where the disease in itself can actually represent some kind of black magic that's occurring on the family, or it's like interfering with God's will if we were to intervene in a specific way. So in other cultures, not just including Asian cultures, but for like the Islamic faith, for instance, right? So pre-cancer breast screening, going into a mammography machine, where it does require the exposing of breasts. So in some cultural values where that's just a huge no-no because it's considered taboo, they would just frown upon that kind of practice, in order to, even though it has been shown that it does decrease the likelihood, or increase the likelihood, sorry, correct myself there, increase the likelihood of survival, because we're catching that cancer early enough. But because it's considered taboo, or because it's considered to be interfering with the will of God, that those kind of medical practices will be prohibited. And this has been found in Asian culture and also in Islamic faith as well. All right, Justin, go ahead and go to the next slide. Are you stuck? No, there we go. Okay, so what does this really all mean for us? And a clinical application, really what we start to bring into question is just cultural competence, right? So how well can we appropriate ourselves to the growing diversity of populations that we all may serve in our own unique environments, whether it's high school, collegiate, clinical, or even in the professional realm as well. Military being included in that too. So we're really the first point that we want to tackle is just unconscious bias, just being that there are social stereotypes that are out there over certain groups of people, that these stereotypes may be formed outside of our own conscious awareness. And the truth of the reality is that everyone holds some kind of unconscious belief about a specific group. And that can come just from our own tendency to organize social worlds just through categorizing. So we as athletic trainers have the ability to intervene and prevent these things from kind of happening. So if we were to focus on the individual athlete attributes of our patients, rather than just seeing the patients through the lens of belonging to a certain minority group, that could probably enhance the communication between ourselves, our colleagues, and also our patients that are going to be coming with their own diverse experiences and backgrounds, right? So increasing this communication increases our ability to take on more enhanced perspectives to experience empathy for our patients. And the second point we want to address in cultural competence is also just microaggressions that may occur. So microaggression is a comment or an action that may subtly offend somebody, that whether that happens unconsciously or unintentionally, we're just kind of trying to crack a joke or something like that. But what we're not realizing or recognizing is that we're expressing some kind of prejudice attitude towards a member of some kind of a minority group. So for athletic trainers, one way that we can address or take best practice to kind of limit the likelihood of this occurring, or limit the risk that this occurs inside of a professional or inside of our clinical settings, is we just want to watch out for some of those subtle or unconscious acts of prejudice towards those patients, so whether we're just labeling somebody, so to speak, and if these kinds of acts do occur, we don't want to ignore them. We want to acknowledge them, but we want to acknowledge them in a caring way, not something that's going to shame others. So we want to communicate our support to the person that may have been accidentally targeted by a microaggression. And we want to make it clear, not just to our patients, but also to the clinicians and the other professionals that we work with, that, our goal is really to respect and include everyone, to provide inclusion in our professional settings. And it's just important. This really speaks a lot of light into the goal of this, is to just educate all the clinicians, and just more importantly, just not to shame anybody, because they're unconscious, things that some of us just may not be aware that that's offensive for somebody. So even in the process of, developing this presentation, just taking the time to make sure that we're using the most appropriate language possible, because cultural competence, something that was actually, interesting to read from a cultural competence assessment that occurred in 2010, facilitated by the NATA, found that this is back in 2010, so it is a little bit of an older study. And from what I'm aware, there is a new one coming out here relatively soon, which hasn't been published yet. But what they found was that there is a higher self-reported rate or score, of cultural competence than what actual assessment scores showed from this 2010 assessment. It was also found that female athletic trainers were found to be more culturally competent than the male ATs. And multicultural or multiracial ATs and African American ATs were found with the highest cultural competence scores compared to Caucasians. For the lowest of cultural competence scores was actually noted in the American Indian and Alaskan Native groups. And then also there was no significant difference between experience levels either on this. So what it means is just that it doesn't really matter how long you've been a certified professional or not. These are all things that we're kind of all subject just to kind of be aware on and kind of do our own due diligence, just to enhance the way that we are practicing and providing care. Because as we all know, sometimes we tend to be behind the ball with certain things. Medical science is still relatively slow. And so when it comes down to cultural appropriation, there's a lot of things that some people still have some kind of bias towards, or kind of want to be a little apprehensive and push back with some of these things. So let's go to this next slide here before we kind of conclude this thing up. So the most important part that we really want to note is words matter. And I'm going to transition back to Justin here, just to kind of talk about patient labeling and go a little bit further into some of these other items and topics that all this kind of just we're really shining some light as far as what we can do better from a healthcare standpoint. All right, Justin.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, as alluding to what Miguel said, words do matter because as Dr. Nasipany and Dr. May mentioned multiple times with us over the summer in, PERT and myofascial manipulation classes, and pretty much almost every day in any class that we had with them over the summer, is a lack of presence on either side, whether it's the clinician or the patient, is going to lead to delayed healing time. And lack of presence means lack of healing. So our inability to be empathetic towards sexual orientations, race, religion, ethnicity, gender. Um, I don't know if I just said religion or not, but our inability to be empathetic towards any of that or aware of what we're saying or how or our nonverbals or anything like that, that's already a lack of presence in that. And then if we go a step further and have these unconscious biases or these microaggressions towards our patients, that's going to completely close them off. And that's going to lead to a lack of presence on their side, which leads to a lack of trust from the patient to us, which then we don't reach our common goal of getting why they're there, which is getting the patient better. So big thing I just wanted to focus on here is when it comes to patient labeling, there's a big difference between saying the patient with the ACL or, Miguel with the ACL tear versus just calling him the ACL patient or ACL boy or my ACL kid that it always comes in that's a pain in my rear end or anything like that. So just being aware that every single patient is a person and that we should not be labeling them just based off of their condition because that leads to a negative connotation right there. Um, on top of that, religion. So just consider sensitive words, avoid slang phrases, um, and that knowledge is power. So there's a big difference between Hispanic versus Latinx. So Hispanic is very broad when it basically states that Hispanic is any person whose lineage is from a Spanish-speaking country or area, whereas Latinx or Latino, Latina, Latinx is a person whose lineage is from Latin America. Sex versus gender. Sex is a biological assessment at birth based on outward anatomy, whereas gender is a social construct surrounding their self-identification. So you can self-identify on what your gender truly is. And then obviously race versus ethnicity. Ethnicity is heritage and ancestry. Race is man-made based off of what you see what you see around you and what's in media and popular culture. So it's just very, very important to make sure that you are careful with your verbiage and being able to promote a very healing environment that obviously you don't want to have any offensive language towards your patient or any offensive nonverbals. You want to promote a place of healing and help them reach their common goal, which is to get that patient better. Anything to add on to that, Miguel, before we transition on?
I think this was great. I mean, I learned a lot through this whole experience. So, I mean, if you just want to transition to this last slide, just want to take a moment and just thank everyone for your time. Thank you for taking a listen. Hopefully, you guys have learned a lot. We learned a lot through this entire process. But yeah, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys. There's our references.
Fantastic. And let's
Hold
end
on,
this.
hold on.